So, good evening, everyone. I'm going to invite you to find a seat, maybe grab a drink or some food. Thank you. Thank you so much. Good evening and welcome to this independent street check review, community consultation. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing to be here. We acknowledge that we're starting a little past our time, but we wanted to give people an opportunity to arrive so that there's some critical mass in the room. We know that traffic and getting families settled takes time, and 6 o'clock can be difficult. So we just want to acknowledge those of you that are here and say thank you. I also want to start really by acknowledging the elders in the room. Thank you for being here. We acknowledge you. And also, if there are youth in the room, even little children, we just want to acknowledge their presence as well and say thank you. I'm not sure if there are other special guests or elected officials in the room and anything like that. But if there are, I'm sorry if I'm missing the opportunity to acknowledge you, but thank you for coming. I want to invite Justice Tulloch up to officially welcome you, and then my colleague Danielle Dowdy, who will give you some logistical instructions for the evening, and then I'll be up to set you up for your consultative process, and then back to do some facilitating. So, Justice Tulloch, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kika. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank all of you for coming out. This is our 7th public meeting out of 12 that we're going to be having. This is my 2nd time here in Ajax. I was here about a year ago, or just maybe about a year and a half ago, when I was engaged in the previous reviewing civilian oversight of policing. And I found that this was a very important and engaging community. And a lot of what I heard here was very informative and instrumental in the report that we ended up doing and submitting to the government. So again, I want to thank you for coming and for participating in this consultative process. We're here this evening to speak to you about the issues of street check, but just before I explain to you the nature of our engagement, I want to acknowledge that we're on the land of the First Nations. This is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee peoples, the Anishinaabeg, and it's an area that's covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and directly adjacent to the Haliman Treaty Territory. The First Nations people of the Iroquois and the Huron-Wendat, Ojibwe, Chippewa peoples, as well as the Métis people and the Inuits also inhabited these territories. I believe that in recognizing and acknowledging the First Nations, we're showing our respect to the history and the traditions of our First Peoples in these regions and in not only in Ontario but also in Canada. And I think it's critically important to any kind of reconciliation going forward. So I acknowledge the territories on which we stand. Now, I'm here this evening in the capacity of an independent reviewer of the new regulation passed by the Ontario government in 2016. And these regulations were put in place to regulate the practice known as carding, or what is generically called street checks. Now, street checks is a much broader term, but we all some of us are familiar with the term card-in, and that's really effectively what the regulation was put in place to regulate. And more specifically, it was intended to limit or ban the arbitrary interaction of some police officers with members of the public for the sole purpose of collecting their personal identifying information. Now, I am an independent reviewer, which means that my position is independent of the government, and it's also independent of the police. So, throughout these consultations, people, during the course of the discussions, they want to ask me questions about what my thoughts are. Well, I'll tell you that I'm not in a position to answer any questions, right? I'm here really to listen to you. And as a judge, that's what I do. I listen. I'm still here in my capacity as a judge from the Court of Appeal for Ontario, not as an arm of the government. The people that are working for me that you will see, they work for me in my capacity as a judge. So we're not here to answer any questions about the regulation because, I'm here to look at it critically and to hear from you what your thoughts are. And then we'll go back, consider what your experience is and what your views are, and then I will critically assess it and make recommendations, right? So I just want you to understand that. That is my role. I'm not an apologist for the government nor the police. So as indicated, I was asked by the government back in June of 2017 to conduct this review. Now, I will be reviewing the content of the regulation to see whether it reflects the important goal of ensuring bias-free police-community interactions, as well that the police and public interactions are consistent and conducted in a way that promotes public trust and confidence, while at the same time respecting individual rights and civil liberties. Now, I will also be reviewing the regulation with a view to determine whether or not police services, the chiefs of police, as well as police services boards are in compliance with its terms and are following it. Now, in so doing, I will be conducting a very comprehensive review of this regulation. And I've indicated that I have a team. I've put a team together, a team of experts, some of whom are here, who will assist me in this regard. Now, since September, we've been engaged in a very extensive consultation process throughout the province of Ontario. And now we've embarked on our public consultations. As indicated, tonight is our 7th. We will be meeting again tomorrow night in Markham. And then in the second week of April, we'll be going to Windsor, London, and then Sudbury. I intend to draw on what I have been learning from these consultations to formulate the report that I've spoken about and the ultimate recommendations on the regulation which I will make. This report will be submitted to the government on November 30th, 2018, and will be made available to the public no later than January the 1st, 2019. Now, by way of background, I've indicated, and I just want to reiterate, the regulation is intended to govern the police and public interaction when the police is seeking to obtain a person's identifying information in situations where a legal or statutory law, such as the Highway Traffic Act or the Trespass to Property Act or the Criminal Code, does not obligate the citizen to give the police his or her information, right? So what that means is, if you're stopped by the police under the Highway Traffic Act, you have to give them, and you're asked, you have to give them your personal identifying information, your driver's license, and so forth. Or if you're trespassing on someone's property under the Trespass to Property Act, the police is, they have the responsibility to ask you for your identification. you're obliged to provide it. Or if you're being arrested for a criminal offense, right, you are obliged to give the police your information. But there are situations where you may not be involved in any kind of infraction, be it provincial or criminal, and the police may just suspect, based on, you know, where you are and certain other indicia, that you're a suspicious-looking person. And they may say, okay, well, you know, what's your name, sir, or ma'am? Under those circumstances, it's up to you whether or not you want to provide that information. You're free not to, right? And these are the circumstances that we're looking at, right? So the regulation outlines what an officer must do if they ask for your identifying information in those circumstances. The regulation is not intended to stop the police from speaking with the public or the public from speaking with the police. The regulation is intended to stop the police from randomly and arbitrarily collecting personal information from members of the public who they speak with. So the regulation also provides information and guidelines on the storage of information that comes from street checks. As well, it provides the mandatory training for all police on the new rules, the development of policies and procedures by the police services, as well as the police services boards. As well, it provides the guidelines for the public reporting requirements by the police services. Now, with that background in mind, I encourage you to speak freely at your tables and address the issues that, or the questions that we've asked. I'm looking forward to hearing from you later in the wrap-up session. And I just want to emphasize again that this review is fully independent and that I am here to hear from you, and whatever you say will be considered very, very carefully. I'll be listening intently, I'll be making notes, and I will be taking seriously everything that I hear this evening. So again, thank you for coming out.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Avant qu'on commence, je vais faire une petite annonce en français. Sachez qu'un service d'interprétation vers le français est disponible. Veuillez vous munir des écouteurs que vous trouverez à l'arrière de la salle si vous souhaitez écouter en français. Notre interprète s'appelle Violaine et elle est dans la cabine. So thank you so much for coming. I just said that if you are interested in listening in French, we've got a French translator, and there's headsets there that you can get if you so desire. So sorry, I just skipped through what the regulation's about because Justice Tulloch just went through that. And what we're doing here is one of our consultations. There are 12 of them, and we are traveling across the province of Ontario. The goal of the public consultations is to hear from the public. So we want to hear your thoughts on street checks, your experiences, any recommendations that you might have on ways to improve the regulation. As a disclaimer, the review does not look at individual cases, so we're not analyzing individual cases. We do want to hear from you if you have had an experience with a police officer or with a police service. But unfortunately, we're not here to actually take those cases and attempt to resolve them on your behalf. So that's just for you to know. And so the time is going, so I'm going to speak really fast, but this is the introduction portion. We're going to get right into the discussions. And so you may have heard Kika say, if you're sitting by yourself or if there's two of you and there's three of you here, if you could somehow join to make a table. Because the point of this part is really it's a group exercise. So there's an engagement guide on your table, and in that guide there are questions that we would like. Even on top, you'll see public the consultation questionnaire. So those questions, thank you, Kika's holding it up. So the questions really, they go through different points that we're looking at within the regulation. You don't have to answer them all in order. You don't have to, if there's something that your table would like to discuss in particular and really drill down on that, that's helpful to us as well. But if you can go through the questions and answer them, we're going to ask you to appoint a person to take notes and to report back to us. So we've got about 45 minutes, I believe, and then we're going to ask you to just let us know what the discussions were, and Justice Tulloch and the rest of our team will be here taking notes on the feedback that you've provided to us, and that will help us when we're writing our report. And so, you know, we are on social media, and we tweet and we post under the hashtag StreetChecks. So we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And you'll see members of our team will be taking photos, either with our phone or with a camera. There's Peter Rehax at the back. He's actually got an actual camera. But the rest of us will be tweeting and taking photos. And this is also being live streamed on Facebook right now. So Dylan at the back of the room. Hi, Dylan. He's got the camera posed up here for now, but once we start the feedback, he'll be recording. So if you don't want to be recorded, not an issue, just let us know. And if you don't want to be recorded, especially for Facebook, then try to avoid the camera, which is right there. And feel free to join in on the conversation. So you can tweet, you can tag, you can post, and anything that you'd like to do. And I believe that's it. So we good? All right. So you can. Okay. All right, so you can get started on the questions.
If you don't mind, if I could beg your indulgence, I just have a quick question. I've heard a number of times that this function is completely independent, including Mr. Todd, who I respect personally very much. But it begs the question, if this is truly independent, who is funding this whole thing? I mean, I really enjoyed the meal here, it's great. But, you know, I kind of wonder, who's funding this? If it's completely independent, does that mean the government has nothing to do with this?
Did you want to?
Some level?
No, I'm not going to answer that. I just said that I won't, and we're not going to engage in any kind of interaction at this point. Thanks very much for your question. You and I can have a private conversation after. Thanks.
There you go. All right. Thank you so much. You get started.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So we're now going to enter into the talkback portion where we're going to ask you to share your experiences. Thank you so much. So we're now going to do the talkback portion where we'll just move table to table to hear about your conversation. We have approximately 5 minutes per table. So hopefully there's someone that's prepared to speak and share. As Justice Tulloch and Danielle said before, you will see members of the team taking notes. We're also recording. So we will capture the details of what you have to say. You can also leave notes on the table. And of course, you can join us online if you have more to say that you feel like might have been missed. So there's multiple ways to communicate with the team. It looks like Dave is ready at our first table. Thank you.
You know, I didn't volunteer for this, right? I'm being voluntold.
Sometimes we're voluntold, right, sir?
Certainly, I've been voluntold.
I know. It's on. Just hold it closer. Thank you so much.
So I know most of you, and good evening, everybody, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. I know a number of people have probably covered a lot of what we have done here, so maybe the fortunate part, we get to be the first ones.
Yes.
Too bad for you guys who will start. So we spoke about a number of things, but I'll highlight 3 of them that actually made a lot of us have our juices flowing quite well. One of them being, when is the appropriate time for data that has been collected from a routine stop that no crime was identified during that stop? When should that data be erased or removed from the record of the police officers or whatever the police department that collects it? And then the second part to that to follow up is there a shelf life for that kind of information that's collected through those routine stops, in which whether majority of the times where crime has not been established, where that data should never see another day after that period. And then it goes on to also speak to, are there any processes within the system in which most of this education or scenarios that we learn through some of the stoppages or the carding that is embedded into a training of an officer in which that information can inform on what good policing should be or could be, so that at least we can build communities in which citizens don't have to fear the officers that are supposed to serve and protect them. There are also incidences in this that are covered within the same arm of training that focus about, when should professional development be a thing that police officers should be also abided by, such as when you see in healthcare, in law, in other, regulated colleges, you have to have your PDUs or professional development units in which they can inform and also tell the individual that's being involved in that they can continuously strive to be better based on the processes that can inform what best practice of being an officer should be. And then, one of the other charged parts that the entry gateway to most of this practice as a police officer is, we talked about, yes, you have a college degree, you may have gone through a two-year college to get that entry-level education. But should that be the only aspect that should be considered for officers when they get into the profession? Things such as, in that regard, should we have other tools that could be used to assess the fit of those individuals so that we can avoid some of these unintended consequences by either running, is that lie detector test, is that emotional intelligence training, so that we know we have the right tools in the right officer on the street. The least you want to do is to hand a gun to a man who has wrong intentions on the street. They end up harming our community or harming other people as they are going around in their business. They do this in the army. They go through lots of psychological training to make sure that you are ready for the battlefield. When is it going to be time for officers to get through some of those screenings so that we have the right of intentions for those that are out there? And then as also the last part in terms of education, the experiences that were shared right on the table included, as an example, people that got to be followed, but then through that following, no stoppage happens. It's whatever reasonable distance that could be, the officer just pursues, with no lights on, up until the person pulls on in their neighborhood or at a grocery store. They leave them alone, they go the other way. But the idea in that is there is an element of bullying and harassment in those circumstances in which those individuals, whether the intent was to protect me, to watch my back as I'm driving for unknown reasons, kudos to you for doing that, but it's part of that history that when we look back is like, what is this all about? Mm-hmm. Is there a law that could inform or processes that could inform the officers? Should they be doing all this driving behind and or stopping? They should have an opportunity like they do in other countries to stop and introduce themselves. Hello, my name is Francis. Here's my badge number. And the reason why I'm stopping you is because maybe you are driving while black and it's not allowed in this neighborhood. Next time, change your color of your skin before we stop you. Whatever that means. Anyway, I left something.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Test, test. All right. I think similar to what the last table just said. There are circumstances, we spoke specifically about DWB, driving while black, that happen. And sometimes, you know, it's a circumstance where you can't explain it. And I believe that this policy, it doesn't really address the concerns of individuals that are minorities in driving. I spoke about a circumstance where I was driving my vehicle, windows down, summertime, got pulled over because of tint. And when I rolled up the windows on request, he said, yeah, they were too dark. And it turned into a big thing. Later, it got dropped only because another officer who happened to pass by after 4 other cars converged around mine recognized me and, you know, spoke to the staff sergeant. If it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for the fact that I was in corrections and as an officer, I don't know what would have happened. You know, these things happen a lot. And, you know, with this policy, it still comes down to officers' discretion. It still comes down to reasonable and probable grounds. And that's based on an individual's perception. So even though there is a statute and there's a bunch of pretty words that say things that sound good, I think at the end of the day, it comes back to the fact that most of the officers that would approach an individual of color are not usually from the city. A lot of these officers are trained. They have, like the gentleman said, all of the requirements on paper, but they've never interacted with a person of color or diversity. And as a result, their perceptions based on media, based on their own family values and so on and so forth, project onto us as individuals who are just minding our own business. And it puts us in a state of paranoia. Paranoia leads to, you know, outbursts. And at times the outburst is based on your day. It could be based on a fight with a spouse. You're in your car trying to get some peace and quiet, and then an officer pulls up on you just because. You know, and they don't use discretion. There's some times where discretion can be used. Just a couple days ago, I was pulled over, driving my car, and I didn't realize that I had to change my ownership to say multicolor because I wrapped it a certain color. And the officer could have used discretion and not given me a ticket and just said, you know what, sir, you're wearing a suit, you're just happen to be driving at Jane and Lawrence, you know, here, just go to the ministry, change your license so that nothing happens, and I'll just put on your license a warning. But no, he slapped me with 2 tickets. He said 1 for the ownership not displaying and for not having proper ownership of your vehicle. And I thought it was, you know, a little arbitrary, but I mean, he's doing his job. And again, it comes down to discretion. So how much discretion are they going to use if I was maybe, you know, running to the grocery store and forgot my belt and my pants were sagging? And maybe I didn't go to the barber and shave, right? That same type of behavior is something that, you know, it concerns me. If I have a generic name like Mike Brown and I'm in Jane and Finch, and I fit the description, but half of the population of Jane and Finch is 6'4", black, and Mike Brown, right? It doesn't help, and it doesn't allow us to be free to just be citizens and walk about the place just as people who are tax-paying and doing what we're supposed to be doing. There is an element, of course, that they need to address, and I agree with it, but I don't think that this policy really defines that element. I don't think it's going to do anything more than just put a lot of people in a place where a database is made, and at any time after it's been tallied and you've been poked and poked and poked, and that one time where your outburst is what they want it to be, now you're held in contempt based on all of the data that they've collected. You were in the wrong place. You were hanging with that guy. You were at that corner. You know, you happen to be driving without that permit. You're showing delinquency based on a period of time in which we were just able to carry out and hold on to information for. You know, everyone makes mistakes, and I don't think that this allows you to make a mistake and have it just be called a mistake. It's now something more than that.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Okay, so this table had some interesting views, to say the least. One thing we talked about is the police officers engaging the public as a servant, rather than, harassing them, going up to them and saying, show me your ID, what are you doing here? Maybe they could say something like, are you okay? How can I help you? Do you need help? Are you lost? Do you need help doing something? Also, just to go to the people and talk to them at the events, show them that, cops are human too, and that will help build the trust between, the community and the police officers if they're just going and being regular people saying, yeah, like, give me a piece of chicken too. Like, I want to eat that too, So just that type of stuff. Don't harass them or assume they're doing something just because their pants are sagging or, they're wearing a hoodie in a certain area. We shouldn't have to act or look a certain way to be treated as everyone else is treated. We shouldn't be treated less than just because, we might have a little swag. Also, the whole carding thing in general, do the statistics support it? How many people, how many convictions, how many people are actually getting arrested versus how many people they're actually stopping? Is it 1 in 10? Is it 1 in 100? What's the statistics? No one really knows. So maybe that's something that, we can look about and figure out to see where's the police going wrong? Like, are they actually seeing the police again? Are they interacting with police 5 days later or whatnot? Also, another aspect is the culture of brotherhood in the police force. Who's going to hold them accountable? If their partner sees them doing something wrong, are they going to say, hey, maybe you shouldn't have done this, or go say, you know what, this person didn't do what they're supposed to do and follow regulation? So that's another thing we should look at as well. Also, this table, we actually have some people that work at the region police. They're not police officers, but they do work there. And they said they have an obligation to be more forthcoming when they're stopping people. But are they? Are they being more forthcoming? Are they telling people you have the right to say no, you don't have to show me your ID? That's just another topic. Also, I think just the third and last thing, to educate the youth in a way that they can understand. Social media is big. No one wants to see 100,000 words on a piece of paper that don't really explain anything and people don't really understand. Put into ways that they can understand through music, through art, different forms, different visuals that they can soak in the information and they can know their rights and have the same opportunity as everyone else. Yeah, those are all the different points, but I think that was basically it.
Great, thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So many of the points that everyone or former tables have mentioned, we have had as well. I'm just going to touch on 3 things. One of the questions being, what does street checks mean to you? Some points that came up was heavy surveillance, which is unnecessary, intrusive, degrading, and immoral, destabilizing young minds, the image of the black male being seen in low regard and as disrespectful, and of course that it seems that racialized communities are more targeted due to lack of unity amongst us. And the example came up that if in a Jewish community, for example, if carding was going on, there'd be a little bit more of an uproar to stop the practice in that particular community. But since we are, what's the word? Well, yeah, since we are racialized and nobody's really looking out for us, and I guess civic engagement is a little bit low in our communities, it's seen as a norm. What else? The other thing was public awareness of the regulation. Many of us didn't know about certain things in regards to the regulation, such as officers needing to give receipts after an interaction. And another example came up was the Amber Alerts. I don't know if anybody else has received the text message where they said that Amber Alerts are available through text messages or something like that. So maybe we should have something that educates the public in that same manner so people know their rights and what to do. We also touched on data and who has access to the stored data. Who is aware what happens to the data. A gentleman at our table said that oftentimes when he interacts with officers and asks them what happens to the data, nobody really knows and there's not really an answer given to that. It also came up that the statistics used in carding could actually be used as a benefit to our community, where it can show the biases of the police. So an example that came up was, if there's a radio call in a certain area, then maybe carding would be useful because there's a radio call for that particular area. However, if a police officer is just going around carding people and there's not really any reasonable grounds, the community can say, oh, well, that's not really right. So it came up that the gatekeeper of this data has been totally one-sided. Another point that came up is that police are deliberate when you interact with them. They intimidate, they bully. The first table already mentioned that. And what else? About the app. Ms. Shan is asking me to talk about the app because we touched upon about public education. There's actually an app called Legal Swipe. It's on iOS and Android. And basically it just tells you what you are able to say and do when you're interacting with a police officer. It's very easy to use. So in the thing for the gentleman said for the youth, it's very easy to use and scroll through and everything like that. And it just breaks it down in an easy step-by-step manner. So if you guys haven't heard about that app, I recommend it. It's called Legal Swipe. Again, available on iOS and Android. And I think that's it.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm going to try to, I did my level best to synthesize what we discussed. So table, thank you, and to you all, thank you for the time. Understanding that this is a local conversation. Mm-hmm. Being in Durham region, we have 8 municipalities, of which signage, digital, verbal, and is available. And we have half a room that is not filled to capacity, is disappointing. We here at the table had some very fruitful discussion. Three big points I might extend. As people of color, vigilance has always been at the forefront. Historically and just ingrained as young people, as older people, and as people bringing up other young people, historically that trust or mistrust has become something of a popularized perversion. If we look at, we heard from a brother about this very conversation, this type of conversation happening on a TV show. We see the threats happening on Black Twitter and other forms of media. It's perverse, but the solutions are not quite there. We'll get there eventually. It's going to take a lot of hard work. Just going from what folks were saying before, it might sound repetitive, but shifting police and civilian relations, being visible in the community, doing meaningful, positive work all of the time, not just during quota time, not just during Caribbean Festival because I'm a black cop gonna go see black people. Be in the community all the time. And boost proactive research. Going back, we have municipalities, 8 municipalities with digital signage. We have folks who are employed to let the communities know about these consultations and these conversations. There should be proactive outreach, continued proactive outreach happening in our communities. To have these conversations, there shouldn't be reason why clarification is required still when we're asked, were you asked to identify yourself or provide ID? It should be open and shut as adults. It should be clear, made clear, and continued to be educated as young people and young people coming up. So if there's this outreach, this proactive outreach being made available in schools, in organizations, in diversion programs, and in communities at times similar like this during supper time, well posted so folks and residents are aware. And if we're consistent on this, this is where the trust is built within our communities. So for this time here, Justice Tala, Kike, and all involved, much appreciated, but much more work is required by all of us in this community. So the more we let our brothers and sisters know about these conversations, and the more consistency we have in getting these conversations had, the better things will go. I don't want to have this conversation with my young people 30 years from now. Mm-hmm. Tired of it. My parents are tired of it. So let's get this all done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. First, we want everyone to know that everyone at our table totally disagree with the regulations, totally disagree with carding. We think it's an invasion of privacy and it should not be bestowed on anyone of any race. A lot of people who at our table were not aware that there were even regulations to regulate the carding. We asked ourselves, why is there a regulation in the first place? And it's evidently clear that because of the biasness would be involved in the implementation of this carding mechanism. We asked ourselves at our table, at what age do you card someone? Or do you stop someone? 10 years of age? 20? 25? I am an older guy, and I believe I've been carded by police officers, not only when driving, but just being in a certain environment. And we totally, if there's something we can do to get rid of this carding and the regulation, we will surely do it. We know the law has been implemented. And based on some of the questions which we have addressed directly, we view it as totally biased. We view it as an insult to certain ethnic people, and it just shouldn't be. But I will allow my colleague to also add to what I'm saying.
Good evening, everybody. So again, our whole table unanimously believes that carding should just be done away with. It is an invasion of privacy. I know we've kind of touched on that. And especially because of the inconsistencies. So yes, we talk about training. Training is only as good as the individual that's going to take the training further. So if you have 10 different cops and everybody's coming with their own bias, you cannot determine who is going to do what they need to do. Back to what we talked about with the receipts. A lot of us were unaware that receipts were required to be given. So with that being said, with the lack of knowledge, now if you have, let's say, a teenaged child who definitely, more than likely, is unaware that a receipt should be provided, and their interaction now with the police officer happens, how are they guaranteed, or how are we guaranteed that they're actually receiving this receipt and not just being harassed? And then how long is this information stored? Like, this could be something that could be used to be such a detriment to anybody's life, because now you're going to be profiled in a manner that might not necessarily warrant this profile, you know, known to police. Like, are you now considered known to police just because you've been stopped, you've been carded? And what are the community effects? Because now are we looking at a certain presence within certain communities more prevalent than in other communities? Something else that was brought up that we obviously were unaware of was the fact that the information is stored and how it's used. And the fact that police services are supposed to provide every year the statistics, you know, according to this, on, so under the regulation, police services must report to the public every year on their street checks activities, including demographic information of the people being stopped. But according to what we've heard, only Ottawa so far has provided this information, and according to them, they've only had 7 stops. So what about all the other police services within the province? Like, what's happening? And with that being said, we're now in March of a whole new calendar year. Is there not some kind of consistent deadline? So we need to have it in by March 31st of the next following year, or does it have to be in by February 15th of the following year? Or are we now giving the police services the will to do it however they want, whenever they want, and then to be able to just release it in a busy news cycle where it gets just shoved under the carpet? You know, and this information is very important, because then this will help to show how you are targeting specifically minorities and, you know, people of color. So we are not happy with this whole
I'm
carding.
give you the 20-second
Yep.
card.
And that's to conclude that we just think that it should just be done with, period.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Again, we really appreciate your time and your, you know, all of your input. I want to remind you again about our social media handles, as well as the website, as an opportunity if you have more to say. If you know other people who might want to weigh in on this conversation, please encourage them to check out our website. We also have, tomorrow will be in Markham. And if you know people in Ottawa, if you know people in Windsor, if you know people in London, if you check out our website, you'll see the dates, times, and places will be in those cities. And Sudbury. Did I leave any out, team? Any other cities? No? And so, sorry, you have a question, sir?
Yeah, I just want to know, since we don't have like a full room with like each table full, is there an opportunity to have possibly a second speaker at each of the tables? You know, having, you know, a 45-minute conversation sort of compressed into 5 minutes for one speaker at a table, I don't think there's enough information in terms of maybe what you're looking for.
Okay, so,
There may be other people in the room that wish to speak.
So intuitively, I don't get that sense. You might want to have more to say, which is fine, and maybe you can talk to us offline. But intuitively, I don't get the sense that there was like additional people per table, to be consistent, that in here tonight.
Can we ask if there's additional people that would like to maybe?
So here's the thing. I mean, the process, we've been pretty consistent across the province in how we've done these processes. We ask people to take notes, we collect the notes, and then we ask people to give a synopsis. We've actually gave way more time tonight because it was such a small group per table than we normally do even. So we acknowledge that these processes aren't perfect. Like it's not a dissertation, right? For sure. But that's why I keep sort of reminding people that sending in your more feedback is absolutely welcomed in terms of the website. And coming to additional sessions. That's why I kind of go over the list. We'll be in Markham tomorrow if people feel like they missed something, but definitely please send, because it's not that different, because basically what's going to happen is everything that was said tonight gets transcribed into paper anyway. So if you have something to say that you don't feel like was said tonight, we'd be really happy to have you input that online. But if you can imagine with this kind of conversation, we could literally go all night. So, yeah.
Today is the International Day of the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and I feel like it's really important to, you know, maybe extend the conversation for a few more moments. You know, I can appreciate, I don't know what all the conversations were around the room, but there was, you know, a number of things that were not brought up. For example, you know, there are various communities that are affected by police carding. You know, when we look at urban centers, yes, there's black and brown individuals that are affected, but I fail to hear, you know, some of the conversations that might be affecting indigenous communities that don't live, that might not have a huge population here in the city of Toronto.
Yeah.
And I feel like they were represented tonight, for example. And like I said, today is
Yeah. So, yeah.
racial discrimination.
Right.
I really feel like it's important to continue the conversation. As you can tell, I still have some things to say, so.
Yeah. So.
You know, you might have missed one or two other people. I still want to continue the conversation if you'll.
Yeah, so unfortunately we can't do those sorts of things on the basis of one person.
Okay, sir, no disrespect to you, right? But we have a process that we've engaged in. And what I can say to you is, we are broadly engaging the indigenous communities.
Yeah, huge.
Right? And just so that you know, like Kike says, this conversation can go on all night, right? And you know, I've taken the responsibility to ensure that we're having 12 of these public meetings. We're widely advertising them. We're making sure that people learn about it, and so that your voices can be heard. But we're not going to continue the conversation after, like right now, because.
I'm just.
And I hear you. I hear you. I hear you.
I made a recommendation.
And I hear you.
And you know what? Like, I don't want to take over the meeting, but
No.
your questionnaire, this is an independent review.
Sir.
But it wasn't brought up. Number 7, what obligations do police have when they can stop and talk to people? That's under police stops.
Right.
So, like, this is looking like I apologize. I really do. I just really need to make this point, because this is an independent review, and the way that this question is written, it wasn't brought up, and I need to bring it to your attention.
Okay, fair enough.
And it's basically talking about how police carding is an engagement tool. Police carding is not an engagement tool. Police want to engage communities. Part of the conversation we had at our table, and possibly other tables, was that they can engage communities. Maybe that's where the focus can be, engaging communities, making communities actually feel safe. But the way this question is written makes it look like police carding. It's misleading, or it's leading, whatever way you want to read it. And I believe it needs to be changed. I don't know, I'm offended that it's written that way. That's why I want to bring that to your attention.
Thank you.
Yes, and I don't
Thank
know
you.
that that's going to happen, but you guys are an independent review, and that question needs to be changed. You have more reviews coming up. You know, your name tags have, like, you know, it's not just name tags. It has, like, the Ontario coat of arms on there. Like, and so you're supposed to be as independent or unbiased or whatever as you can be. You have to remove all sources of your bias or appearance of it. I'm not saying that you're biased. No disrespect to you. I'm not saying you're biased. I'm just saying appearance of bias. Just the way that question is written is leading or misleading.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. So again, I just want to thank everyone for coming out, and thank you for engaging in the process. I want to invite you to have more of a say by going online, because as I said, the written word, the spoken word, it all gets translated into written word. So feel free to do that. Justice Tulloch, you have the last word.
Right. Okay, so again, I want to thank all of you for coming out, and I've listened to your comments, and they will be considered. We are independent, I reiterate that, notwithstanding the coat of arms. The courts have a coat of arms, right? So, you know, like, that's not definitive, but I want you to know that everything that you're saying is being considered and will be taken very, very seriously. These consultations, they continue. We're going to be going up to, you know, in Northern Ontario. We started in Northern Ontario, and we continue over the next month and a half or so to engage communities. And we would ask that if you have friends, families, individuals that you know that are interested in these issues, please let them know about these conversations that are being had so that we can hear from them. Thanks again.